St. Augustine's Church sat quietly in the heart of a bustling metropolis, where skyscrapers stretched high, blocking out the sunlight and, at times, the compassion of the human heart, a symbol of faith and redemption. The church drew hundreds of worshippers each week, but just a few steps beyond its sacred walls, a heartbreaking reality persisted: thousands of homeless individuals struggling to survive each day. Statistics reveal that over 500,000 people across the United States are living without a roof over their heads. In this city, where the cost of living has skyrocketed in recent years, more than 3,000 people are left homeless, nearly half of whom lost their homes simply because they could no longer afford the rising rent. These cold, hard numbers cut deep, like an open wound amid the glittering streets of urban affluence. For Andre, a young priest at the church, these were not just lifeless statistics. Each weary face he saw on the streets, each hollow gaze waiting for a free meal, served as a solemn reminder of his sacred responsibility. Andre was not merely a preacher, he was the final beacon of hope for many. He organized charity programs, collected food donations, and supported anyone who came seeking help. Yet he understood all too well that his efforts were merely a drop in the ocean of suffering. Even so, Andre refused to give up. His heart, shaped by years of growing up in poverty, constantly reminded him that every act of kindness, no matter how small, carries immense meaning. Yet, in a city where the fast pace of life encouraged people to turn away from inconvenience, Andre couldn't help but feel alone. Among the dazzling lights and towering skyscrapers, he often wondered, is there anyone out there who still sees these forgotten souls? The answer came unexpectedly in the form of a quiet stranger sitting by the church gate, a man seemingly abandoned by the world. Little did Andre know, that man would change everything. On a crisp autumn evening, as the streetlights flickered to life and cast long shadows across the gray stone walls of St. Augustine's Church, Andre, exhausted after a long day, carefully locked the heavy oak doors. The stillness of the church filled him with a quiet peace. As he turned to leave for the evening, but as he stepped into the cool night air, something caught his eye. A figure that seemed almost out of place amidst the orderly beauty of the evening. Near the iron gates, huddled under the dim glow of the street lamp, sat an older man. He was bundled in a thin, worn-out coat, too flimsy for the chill that was beginning to bite at the air. The man's face was drawn and gaunt, each wrinkle etched deeply from years of hardship, and yet his eyes, the most striking thing about him, held an unusual dignity. There was no pleading or sorrowful resignation in his gaze. Instead, there was a quiet defiance, an almost unspoken resilience. It wasn't the defiance of someone angry with the world. It was the defiance of someone clinging to the last remnants of pride in the face of overwhelming adversity. Andre stopped in his tracks, his heart suddenly tight, his thoughts clouded. He hadn't expected to encounter someone like this outside his church. The man, despite his worn appearance, sat as still as the night itself, almost serene in his silence. He wasn't asking for anything, nor was he complaining. As people walked past, they hardly noticed him, as though he were just another part of the background. Some sped up their pace to avoid even making eye contact, perhaps too uncomfortable with the idea of acknowledging his presence. A few even turned their heads deliberately, as though afraid that by merely glancing at him, they might be obligated to stop, to help, or worse yet, to care. For a long moment, Andre stood frozen, torn between walking on, as everyone else did, or doing something, anything, that might help this man, whose pride and silence spoke volumes. The cold air seemed to seep deeper into his bones, and for some reason, the man's stillness seemed even colder than the evening chill. It was as if his very presence was a question, and Andre wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. The next few hours passed in a blur. When Andre returned to his room in the church, he couldn't shake the image of the man's face from his mind. He had seen so many like him, so many who lived on the margins of society, who wandered the streets unnoticed, their stories written on their bodies in the form of scars, exhaustion, and hopelessness. But there was something different about this man. It was as if he was waiting for someone, or something, an unspoken connection that Andre couldn't quite place, but that tugged at his conscience. His mind raced through the events of the evening. He knew the rules of St. Augustine's church well, rules that were designed to avoid conflicts, especially with the wealthier residents who lived just down the block. The church had official programs for outreach to the homeless, but informal interactions were strongly discouraged. The wealthy residents had made it clear in countless meetings and whispered conversations that they didn't want homeless people loitering near their pristine streets. It was one of those unsaid truths that everyone seemed to acknowledge, but no one spoke about aloud. Andre felt the weight of these rules, the tension between his duty to the church and the deeper call to his heart. That night, as he lay in bed, the quiet weight of the city pressing against the windows, Andre prayed softly, his thoughts drifting upward toward the cross on the wall. Lord, I know what I must do. I've always known what I am meant to do. But, God, I need your guidance tonight. I need your help to do what is right. The night seemed to stretch on longer than usual, and sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, the image of the man's face haunting him, as though it were some divine calling he couldn't ignore. The following day was much the same, a rush of duties, meetings, and tasks that demanded his attention. Yet, every time Andre paused for a breath, his mind would drift back to that man by the gate. The quiet, the stillness, the dignity hidden behind the tattered coat. It all stirred something inside of him, something he couldn't put aside. That evening, after finishing his work, Andre made a decision. He would do something. He wasn't sure exactly what or how, but he knew he had to respond in some way. The church was quiet when he returned, the stillness almost inviting him to act. He walked to the pantry, carefully pulling together a small bag of food, a loaf of fresh bread, a crisp red apple, and a bottle of water. It wasn't much, but it felt like the least he could do. With the small bundle in hand, he stepped back out into the cool air, the night still holding onto the remnants of daylight. Andre approached the man, who had yet to move from his spot. As he neared, the man didn't acknowledge him, didn't react in any way. He was just there, still as a shadow, waiting. Carefully, Andre placed the bag of food beside him. He didn't say anything. What was there to say? The man didn't seem to need anything more than this quiet offering. The man's eyes lifted slowly, meeting Andre's gaze. There were no words, no thank you or sign of acknowledgement. But in the man's gaze, Andre saw something, a flicker of light, something in his eyes that said more than any words could. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. It was something deeper, a shared understanding, perhaps, that transcended the typical give and take of charity. The man's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Andre felt as though they had connected, though neither of them had spoken. Andre smiled gently, his heart swelling with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He gave a slight nod, then turned to leave. As he walked away, the stillness of the night returned, but now it felt less oppressive. There was something in the air, a sense of quiet fulfillment, as though something important had just taken place. That moment, small as it seemed, was the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives in ways they couldn't yet understand, a journey that would unfold in the quiet, unspoken places of the world, where acts of kindness are the only lights shining in the darkness. The man sitting silently by the gates of St. Augustine's church wasn't just any homeless person. Beneath his ragged coat, his unshaven face, and his weathered exterior. He was someone few could ever have imagined. Donald Trump, disguised, one of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the United States. For weeks, he had chosen to live as a homeless man, blending in with the forgotten and the forsaken, seeking to understand firsthand the lives of those living on the margins of society, the invisible ones. And during those weeks, he encountered harsh realities that he had only ever heard about from a distance. He vividly recalled the first time he tried to buy food at a fast food restaurant. He was hungry, and he'd hoped that at least a small meal would ease the gnawing in his stomach. As he walked in, though, the reaction from the staff was immediate. They looked at him with wide eyes, their discomfort palpable. In just a few seconds, they refused to serve him, coldly instructing him to leave. "They looked at me as if I wasn't even human," he said, his voice low and heavy with a sorrow that seemed far beyond mere rejection. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the dehumanization, the invisible barrier between him and the rest of the world. On the streets, that indifference was even more brutal. People walked past him without even glancing in his direction, too busy with their own lives to acknowledge his existence. Some even shouted at him, "Get out of here!" as if his very presence in the public space was an offense. Every night, Donald sought shelter where he could find it. Most often, he would curl up under an old bridge, where the wind cut through his thin coat, and the cold concrete floor seemed to sap away the last bit of warmth from his bones. Crumpled newspapers became his blanket, but they offered little protection from the bitter chill. The hunger was constant, a gnawing emptiness that made his stomach ache and his thoughts clouded with discomfort. He often questioned just how much longer he could endure this existence. "How long can I keep this up?" he'd think to himself, every hour blending into the next as he tried to survive another night. During the day, things didn't get much better. He'd stand in line at the local charity, waiting for a meal, sometimes for hours. The food wasn't much, a small sandwich, a thin bowl of soup that hardly filled the emptiness inside him, but it was all he could hope for. Every minute spent waiting, his body ached, and his mind struggled to keep the feelings of hopelessness at bay. There were days when it felt like even the smallest act of kindness was too far out of reach. And yet, the harshness of the world around him kept pressing in. There were moments when he sat alone on the sidewalk, staring at nothing, consumed by the overwhelming sense of abandonment. "People walked past me as if I didn't exist," he recalled, the bitterness in his voice unmistakable. "I became invisible to them." His pride, once solidified by wealth and power, lay shattered in the face of this raw and unrelenting reality. He realized that the pain of homelessness wasn't just about lacking material things. Yes, he was hungry, cold, and exhausted, but the worst part was the loneliness. It was the feeling that no one saw him, no one cared. That, more than anything, was the most devastating blow to his spirit. Yet, in the darkest days of his journey, one person shone through as a small beacon of hope: Andre. Andre, the young priest at St. Augustine's, had been quietly helping the homeless in the neighborhood for years, often in ways that went unnoticed by the general public. But to Donald, Andre's simple, consistent acts of kindness meant everything. Every time Andre passed by, he would offer him a small gesture, a warm look, a soft smile, and, most importantly, a bag of food. It wasn't much, but to Donald, it was a lifeline. A bag of food wasn't going to solve his problems, but the warmth in Andre's eyes, the genuine compassion he felt for someone who had been so thoroughly forgotten by the world, that was something different. Each time Andre gave him that brief moment of attention, Donald felt like he was being seen for the first time in a long while. It wasn't just the food, it was the recognition, the unspoken acknowledgement that he mattered. even if only for a moment. For Andre, these acts of kindness were just a part of his calling. He had no grand expectations. It was just what he did because it was the right thing to do. But to Donald, those simple gestures became a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak and isolating existence. They served as a reminder that not everyone had turned their back on him, that some people, like Andre, still saw him as a human being, worthy of dignity, compassion, and care. Andre's small acts of kindness were like a flickering flame in the darkness, and Donald clung to them, one small act at a time. They weren't just acts of charity, they were acts of humanity. And that, more than anything, was what kept him going. As Andre quietly helped the homeless man every night, not everyone sympathized with his actions. The wealthy residents living near the church quickly noticed the man's regular presence at the gate. To them, the sight of a homeless man sitting silently amidst their affluent neighborhood was nothing short of a blemish on the otherwise pristine image of wealth and comfort. Disapproving glances and hushed whispers soon escalated into open hostility. At a neighborhood meeting, the tension was as thick as storm clouds before a downpour. A woman draped in expensive clothing stood up, her shrill voice cutting through the room. "We cannot let this go on any longer. That man is turning our neighborhood into a slum. I don't pay high taxes to live next to something like this every day." Others quickly chimed in. A middle-aged man added with a stern expression, "He just sits there. What good does he do for anyone? If we let this slide, it won't be long before a whole crowd of homeless people shows up. We need to act now." The tension escalated as some residents decided to take matters into their own hands. They placed warning signs in front of the church with cold, heartless messages: "No sleeping on the sidewalk. Violators will be prosecuted." A few even called the police, demanding intervention to remove the man. But each time, Andre stepped in to defend him. One morning, as Andre watched from a distance, he saw a group of residents surrounding the man, their words harsh and cutting. Unable to stand by any longer, Andre stepped out of the church, his gaze firm yet calm, positioning himself between the man and the angry crowd. He spoke in a deep, steady voice that carried both authority and compassion. "Please stop. This man is not a problem to be solved. He is a person, a soul precious in the eyes of God, just like all of us. If his presence here is troubling to you, then hold me accountable. But I ask you now, I beg you, open your hearts. See him as someone in need of help, not as a burden." The crowd fell silent for a moment. A few people averted their eyes, avoiding Andre's piercing gaze, while others muttered quietly in frustration. But no one dared to challenge him directly. Andre turned to the man, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to be afraid," he said softly. "Here, you are safe." Andre's words and actions were more than just a defense. They were a powerful declaration that compassion can stand firm even in the face of adversity. Yet, deep in his heart, Andre knew that this was only the beginning of the storm. A few weeks later, an unexpected piece of news spread throughout the city. Donald Trump, the billionaire, presidential candidate, and one of the most powerful figures in America, would hold an important event at St. Augustine's Church. The announcement quickly garnered the attention of the media and the public. The modest little church, once a quiet refuge for the downtrodden, was now ablaze with camera lights and throngs of eager onlookers. As the hour of the event approached, the atmosphere inside the church grew heavy with anticipation. The pews were packed, photographers adjusted their lenses, and the crowd whispered amongst themselves, speculating why Donald Trump had chosen such an unassuming place for his critical speech. Then, at last, the church doors slowly creaked open. A man entered, not the familiar image of Donald Trump in a sharp suit, but someone entirely different. He wore a tattered old coat, faded pants, and scuffed, worn-out shoes. The audience gasped in shock, confused by the sight. As he made his way to the pulpit, the room grew so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Donald Trump scanned the room with steady eyes before speaking. "Do you recognize me?" The crowd froze, their faces betraying confusion and disbelief. Trump continued, slowly removing a pair of worn sunglasses. "For the past few weeks, I have lived as a homeless man, right here, at the gates of this church." A collective gasp swept through the congregation, followed by stunned silence. People began looking at one another, piecing together the realization that he was the very man who had been huddled by the church gate. It was almost too incredible to believe. Trump's voice grew warmer, tinged with emotion. "I wanted to see the world through the eyes of those who have nothing. I wanted to feel what it's like to be ignored, judged, and completely forgotten by society. And in all those dark, difficult days, I found one light, one person who saw me, not as a burden or a problem to be solved, but as a human being. That person is Father Andre." He turned toward Andre, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Father Andre, you have done more for me than I could ever put into words. Your small acts of kindness have changed the way I see life. And today, I want to help change the lives of others." Addressing the congregation, Trump made a bold declaration. "We are going to build a community center right here, in this neighborhood, a place where those who have nothing can find everything they need: food, shelter, jobs, and above all, hope. I will personally fund this project with $10 million. And there is no one better suited to lead this effort than Father Andre." The church erupted in thunderous applause. Many in the audience, who had once judged the homeless man by the gate, now lowered their heads in shame, realizing the shallowness of their own thoughts. Others wiped away tears, moved by the extraordinary moment they were witnessing, a moment that promised lasting change. Andre stood frozen in place, overwhelmed. For him, helping others had always been a natural instinct, a quiet calling. He had never imagined that his simple gestures could lead to something so profound. Slowly, he stepped forward to shake Trump's hand, but Trump pulled him into a warm embrace, whispering, "You didn't just help me. You taught me that compassion is more powerful than anything I have ever possessed." That evening, the light from St. Augustine's Church shone not only on the news, but also in the hearts of everyone who witnessed the event. A clear message rang out. Even the smallest act of kindness can create a ripple effect that transforms the world. The Community Center project was launched with generous funding from Donald Trump and inspired leadership from Andre. But from the very beginning, things didn't go as smoothly as hoped. Instead of being welcomed with enthusiasm, the project quickly encountered a series of obstacles that left Andre and his team struggling to keep up. The first hurdle was legal. Construction permits and bureaucratic red tape dragged on endlessly. Every time they thought one obstacle had been resolved, another would surface, delaying the project for months. As time passed, the mounting pressure forced Andre to hold frequent meetings with government officials to push the process forward. But paperwork was only the beginning. As personnel issues began to emerge, the project became even more challenging. Initially, many enthusiastic volunteers signed up to help. However, the grueling nature of the work drove many of them to quit. Long days under the scorching sun or in cold, rainy weather, combined with the overwhelming workload, caused the number of volunteers to dwindle rapidly. In the end, only a small, dedicated group remained by Andre's side, working tirelessly day and night to ensure the project didn't come to a standstill. The biggest challenge, however, came from the surrounding community itself. Many local residents, who had viewed the center with suspicion from the start, were not shy about voicing their lack of trust. "This will just be another abandoned project," One resident declared loudly at a neighborhood meeting, "They're doing this for publicity, and when it's over, they'll leave us with a pile of junk." Negative rumors spread like wildfire, leading many to turn their backs on the project even before it was completed. But Andre remained undeterred. Instead of arguing or pointing fingers, he chose to listen. He organized public meetings, inviting residents to share their concerns, questions, and doubts. Standing before the crowd, his voice steady yet filled with conviction, he said, "This is not my center, nor is it the church's or any individual's. This is our center, ours as a community, and it will only have true meaning if we build it together." Andre's heartfelt words began to resonate with many. Some residents, still skeptical, decided to give the project a chance. An elderly carpenter volunteered to repair broken tables. A group of young people brought cans of paint and worked together to create vibrant murals on the walls. Gradually, the atmosphere of negativity gave way to one of hope. People began to see this center not as just a building, but as a shared home they could be proud to call their own. For Andre, these small moments of unity became an endless source of motivation. He knew that true change was never easy, but with patience and faith, anything was possible. The grand opening of the community center was a day the entire neighborhood would never forget. From early morning, the air was filled with excitement and anticipation. Hundreds of local residents, many of whom had once been skeptical or hesitant, gathered to witness this historic moment. The walls of the center, once old and dusty, were now adorned with vibrant murals, each stroke of paint telling a story of hope and unity. On the largest wall, bold yellow letters gleamed under the sunlight. "Together, we rise." As everyone settled into their seats, Andre stepped up to the podium, standing before the crowd, his face radiant in the soft sunlight. His voice was humble yet filled with sincerity. We often think of compassion as something grand and extraordinary, but it's not. It begins with the smallest acts, a smile, a word of encouragement, or a piece of bread for someone who is hungry. And it is those small acts that have brought us here today. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, as if to silently thank each person who had played a part in this journey. This center is not mine, nor does it belong to the church or any individual. It is a testament to the power of community, proof that when we come together, there is nothing we cannot achieve. The crowd erupted into applause. But the true celebration began when Donald Trump stepped up to the podium. No longer a man in disguise seeking answers, he now stood as a partner, someone who had experienced a profound change in perspective. Taking the microphone, his voice was strong yet warm. "I used to think that strength came from power and wealth, but after living at the very bottom of society, I have learned that the greatest strength lies in compassion. And I was fortunate to meet someone like Father Andre, a man who didn't see me as a burden, but as a human being deserving of love." Trump paused, his gaze shifting toward Andre and then to the crowd. "We don't need a reason to help others. The only reason we need is the one our hearts give us. This center is just the beginning, and I believe it will not only transform this neighborhood, but serve as an inspiration for others to follow." His words were met with resounding applause, mixed with tears of emotion from many in the audience. Some residents, who had once criticized and judged the homeless man by the church gate, now hung their heads in shame, but also felt a newfound pride in seeing how far their community had come. As the ceremony ended and the bright lights faded, the night sky shimmered with countless stars. Andre stood outside the center, watching families walk hand in hand toward their homes, their faces glowing with hope. He smiled softly, his heart full of contentment. Whispering to himself, he said, "Kindness is a miracle, and every small act of kindness carries the power to create something extraordinary." That night, As the community center stood illuminated like a beacon of hope, one clear message echoed far and wide. No one gets left behind when we open our hearts to one another. In a world where indifference can feel overwhelming, it only takes one act of kindness to make a difference. Each day, we have the power to uplift those around us, to offer a moment of understanding, a simple gesture, or a smile. Just like Andre, we can choose to see people for who they are, not for what they lack. In doing so, we create a ripple of change, turning small acts of compassion into a force for good. May you always carry the light of kindness in your heart, offering it freely to those who need it most. May your actions be a reminder to the world that every soul matters, and that even in the darkest times, a single spark can ignite hope. Remember, it's not the grand gestures that change the world, but the quiet, steadfast moments of care and understanding. Take a moment today to see someone in need, whether it's a smile, a kind word, or a helping hand. You never know. Your simple act could be the light someone is desperately searching for.